What is up, everyone? Piezilla 57 here with another episode of the Project Platinum podcast. And this week it is just me, so I do not have any guests, unfortunately. So we can go and get started. Similar to the last podcast that I did by myself, I'm just going to kind of preface this with some news, even though there isn't really that much news to go over. So I don't think any games are really releasing right now. All of the ones that released this month have already released. And since the last podcast, Anthem and Dirt Rally 2.0, I think are the only two that have released. At least some of the bigger ones. I think Trials Fusion Rising, or whatever it's called. The new Trials game also released, I'm pretty sure. By, I think, Ubisoft. So Anthem, of course, didn't do very well. I haven't really heard anything good about that game. Dirt Rally 2.0, I think, has done fairly well. I think I've only seen a couple of short reviews, but it seems like it did pretty well. I'm not really sure about Trials. I haven't heard much about that. Don't really know many people who have bought and played the game, so I don't have anything to add there. But I think talking about Anthem is a good segue into this week's episode, which is going to be me kind of talking about multiplayer games and live service games in general. Basically because there have been some recent news reports and rumors going around that with the PS5 on the horizon, possibly being announced this year and being released next year, or being announced next year or something like that, but pretty soon we're going to be hearing more about the PS5, it seems, and its official reveal. But there have been recent rumors and reports going around that with the PS5 it's going to focus more on multiplayer and live service games in general. So I'm going to take this episode just to kind of give my thoughts on this whole aspect and whether I think it's going to be good or bad. And it's unfortunate that I don't have anyone to talk about this with this week, because I feel like this is a pretty good topic to kind of banter ideas off of with someone else. But nonetheless, I'm just going to go get into it. So, as I mentioned, Anthem is a live service game, as far as I know. And so if you aren't completely sure what a live service game is, it's basically a game or a type of game like Anthem or like Destiny, where it's not really, so the game isn't going to release and that be pretty much it. It's a game that it's going to be released and then it's going to be frequently and constantly updated with new features and new seasons and stuff like that, basically just to kind of get players to keep coming back and just adding new content. So I guess Destiny is kind of an exception. I feel like with live service games there aren't too many sequels in that game series, and there's no need for it. So like with there's a Destiny 1 and there's a Destiny 2. I don't really know why there's two of them. There's no need for it since they're both live service games. They both games have received numerous updates with numerous content and stuff like that, just to keep players coming back with weekly or monthly events and stuff like that. So again, I don't really know why there was a Destiny 2. There was no need for it, since Destiny 1 was a live service game. All the content in Destiny 2 could have easily been added in Destiny 1, in my opinion. But so yes, PS5 with that on the horizon. There's rumors going around that there's going to be a lot more focus on multiplayer games, and in my opinion, this is terrible decision. Is going to be really bad for the video game industry, because I feel like, so obviously video games were invented with single player content in mind way back in the day when obviously technology wasn't even close to what it is today and stuff like that. Obviously, back then, everything that was created had a single player in mind because they couldn't really have access or the technological ability to make games or content that allowed for multiple players, let alone games nowadays that have over 100 people playing in one match. So obviously video games were invented with single player in mind, and obviously that's going to evolve. And we saw with like the 360, the PS3 era is kind of when multiplayer really came onto the scene. Like I think with PS2 and Xbox there were some games, there was some online content, but it wasn't done super well and it wasn't in a lot of games, and you kind of needed a whole bunch of peripherals and stuff like that to actually be able to play online. So the online multiplayer experience wasn't quite there, though of course with Xbox and PS2 and some of the other so as I was saying, so yes, PS3 and Xbox 360 is kind of when this whole multiplayer online component came onto the scene, at least really boomed onto the scene. But of course before then there was a whole bunch of games, like even on the Sega Genesis and PS1, stuff like that, where you could play co-op, which was always enjoyable. But you could enjoy the experience just as much with playing by yourself. Like the experience really wasn't changed, it wasn't hindered by not playing with someone else. But since the PS3 and Xbox 360 era, everything changed for the worse, in my opinion, with this aspect. So I guess we'll talk about co-op games first. So especially with the current gen consoles, Xbox One and PS4, you rarely see games that have co-op content, or at least couch co-op content, where you can play together on the same console and the same TV in one room. Of course, there are a few games you can do that, such as like Diablo, Gauntlet, Rocket League. However, most games don't have any co-op content, and the ones that do have co-op content are, you can't play it in the same room on the same console on the same couch, which is where the term couch co-op came from. You have to have two TVs, two different systems. You have to connect to each other online with an internet connection, which is really unfortunate, and that's mainly because of the technological advances, and most games nowadays are just adding in, it requires a lot of disk space for graphics and all that stuff, all the new content to make the games look really good. So most games can't handle couch co-op, which is really unfortunate, because I think couch co-op is a fantastic thing, and it's really what drove video games to start adding in more online multiplayer content. So it's really unfortunate that video games kind of have swayed away from couch co-op. I really think they need to bring that back, even if it's sacrificing some other stuff, then so be it. Most games nowadays has so much shitty filler content that's unnecessary that they can easily take out some of that bullshit and put in couch co-op. So that's my feelings with couch co-op and co-op in general. Well, hold on. I need to expand upon that with a very important thing that I forgot, that I left out. So, as I mentioned, so there's not very many games that have couch co-op experiences nowadays, and the games that do have games that don't have couch co-op, the ones that you can play co-op online, a lot of them you can play co-op with friends or randoms, and a lot of those games you can also play solo with or without an AI or AIs. However, most of the time with these games, the games are completely unbalanced, where if you don't have someone to play with, or you want to play by yourself and you prefer playing by yourself, then your experience is being hindered because the games are completely unbalanced. They're built for having more than one person, or for having more than one human person. So playing with AIs or playing by yourself, if that's your preference, or you don't have other people to play with, then your experience is not going to be as good as it would be with someone else, just because it's completely unbalanced. You're going to have a much harder time beating it and stuff like that. So one example that comes to mind is Far Cry 3. There were some really shitty online co-op multiplayer type maps, which were very generic, and you could do these on couch co-op. However, you had to play with someone else because I didn't have anyone to play with, so I had to basically just set a second controller up and just let it idle while I did everything. And it's built for more than one person, which is unfortunate. So I had a hard time doing that by myself. And another example, recently I just did Watch Dogs 2. I did the DLC, which has a really shitty online operation called Off the Hook. So there are basically nine like submissions that lead up to one main mission, which is what you need to get to and beat the entire operation. So there are two options, like on the map there are two different of these submissions you can choose from, and once you finish that, then two more pop up. You just have to keep going until you beat 9 of these, and some of them do overlap. Like the two submissions that pop up you might have already done before, so you either need to do one of them again to bring 2 more up, or you need to like close your game and reload it to bring up 2 new ones. So that being said, this game, of course, like I was mentioning, this is an online operation, so it's built around 2 people. You can do this by yourself, which was what I preferred, because so when I first did this, I match-made with a random, and we went through and we were on the 4th one, and this random team I had was just completely useless. So we would complete the objective and we'd have to like leave the area to complete it, basically. So I did he would just sit there. I did everything by myself. We had completed all the objectives, so we basically just had to leave the mission area. So as I was leaving, I saw him just standing there doing literally nothing in the area. So I left the area just waiting for him to leave the area to complete it, and he just wasn't. And then all of a sudden, he decided to steal a cop car and drive away, giving us wanted stars. So instead of just him leaving the mission and us completing it, he stole a cop car. So after we left the mission, then we had to deal with all of these cops, and then he kept running over people and shooting people and stuff like that. And it just went on forever. And the next one we tried doing was a timed one, basically, where we had to go and prevent this data wipe within a certain time limit. So I went and, like, again, he was doing nothing. He would drive to the area. He would get there way before me, and instead of him actually trying to go and complete the objective, he would literally just stood there doing nothing. So I would have to try and go and do it. I would die, and I'd have to wait like 20 seconds to reload, or to like respawn in. And instead of him trying to go and complete the objective when we were running out of time, he would still just sit there, and I would respawn in. I would still try and go do the objective when we run out of time, when he was just sitting there. And this happened a couple times before I just said fuck it and left him. And so it turns out with this type of thing, with this operation, so if you are doing this and you're matchmaking with a random, say you've completed 7 of these submissions and you matchmake with a random who's only done 4 of them, then your progress resets to only having done those 4, because he is the least common denominator. So it was just a shitty thing overall. So like, I'm trying to do this by myself, which is a possibility, but they can still matchmake with you even though I had all my matchmaking preferences off. I would still be matchmade with, and even when I wasn't matchmade with randoms and I would try going through this one myself, even though it says you can clearly do this with one person, it wasn't scaled to be done with one person. So I basically either had to suffer through this with randoms who were incompetent and didn't know what they were doing or weren't trying, and risk having my progress reset, or I would have to do this by myself and it would take longer and I'd have to retry more just because they were not balanced. There was still the same number of enemies. It was still just as hard as if you were doing it with 2 people. So that's the main problem nowadays with co-op games. Even though it's nice when games have the option for co-op, they need to balance it so you can have just as much fun and the same enjoyable experience doing it solo than with a co-op partner. So now I think I've exhausted everything I wanted to say about co-op games and co-op experiences nowadays and how they're doing it. So now we'll get into kind of the meat of what I wanted to talk about today, which is multiplayer games and live service games moving forward. And as I can't remember if I've directly mentioned this, but I've definitely alluded to it. I don't think this is a good thing that Sony is trying to move more toward this, because, as I've said, video games are obviously were made with single player content in mind. So it doesn't seem it's just ruining the experience if these games nowadays are moving toward mostly multiplayer experiences. And as I've mentioned already, 360 and PS3 is kind of when multiplayer really boomed onto the scene. It's when we had the technology to first be able to implement all of this multiplayer stuff in video games. And it really ruined the experience for most games, because yes, we had the technology with PS3 and Xbox 360 to have online components of video games. However, because of that, almost every video game made on PS3 and Xbox 360 had some kind of unnecessary, really shitty, low-quality online component, just because it's like, oh yeah, we can now implement online into our games and have a whole bunch of people playing together. Let's make this super shitty online experience. They did that just because they can. They didn't think anything of it. Like Far Cry 4 had shitty multiplayer. Uncharted 2 and Uncharted 3 had really shitty online multiplayer co-op stuff. Most Fear 2 and Fear 3. And most of this was just like really shitty, like spin-offs of Team Deathmatch, or they were Team Deathmatch and stuff like that. So that already ruined the experience. Was most developers just adding in online stuff just because they could. They didn't think, oh yeah, there's no reason to have online on here. We're going to put it in because everyone else is, and there was no reason for it. And that's still true today. There aren't very many games that deserve online components. Games should be, my opinion, mainly single player, such as like Spider-Man, and even though it wasn't a very good game, God of War, Red Dead Redemption 2 should only be it, but of course that's another example where it's definitely single player focused, but they added this really shitty online Red Dead Online. GTA is another one that's like that. They added in GTA Online, which is a super shitty online experience when there's nothing to do, and they added it in just because they could. And It's just, and on the other side of the spectrum, there are games that if they want multiplayer, should only be multiplayer only, such as Rainbow Six Siege or For Honor, I guess. For Honor has like a small single player component, which I guess is kind of similar to Rainbow Six Sieges. Like, you can do some stuff offline. You have the situations that kind of get you used to the game with certain operators and how the game works. For Honors is kind of like that also. It has the story mode, but it's super short. It basically just kind of introduces you to the different factions, gets you used to the game. And of course, that I don't mind those. Obviously, the game is centered around multiplayer. It's very clear that it is. Rainbow Six Siege is a very well done game. However, if it were a game that was mainly focused on single player and they tacked on this super shitty multiplayer experience, then that would not be so good. But of course, since it's multiplayer focused, it did a good job with that. But I don't think that should be the case with every single game. Not very many games should be multiplayer only or multiplayer focused. That being said, so as I've mentioned many times, single player games they're designed with single player content in mind. So say with PS5, all of these games are being made that are multiplayer exclusive, multiplayer heavily focused and stuff like that. Years and years down the road, you want to go back and play this game. Oh, what do you know? You can't play the game because either one, no one else plays and the servers are dead, and two, the servers may have been shut down. We're seeing that more and more nowadays with PS3 and Xbox 360 games. There are so many games nowadays where I feel like all the time we're hearing that, oh yeah, the servers for this game are going to be closed. Like recently we had servers for Twisted Metal shut down, PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale shut down, Starhawk shut down. So many different server closures are shutting down. So why would you want to include this multiplayer component in a game if you're not going to keep it up and running? Sure, there might not be very many people playing on some of these games online nowadays, but if you're designing a game with multiplayer and with a multiplayer component and multiplayer stuff in mind, you should keep it up indefinitely. Because say down the road, many years, you want to go back and play a game just to enjoy it because you really loved it. Oh, you can't, because you can't access it because it's all been shut down. Obviously, that's not the case with single player games. If I want to get a PS1 and play some of the PS1 classics, like say I pick up a PS1 and I want to play Resident Evil 3 Nemesis because I haven't played that one yet, I can easily do that. I don't have to worry about finding other players online. I don't have to worry about servers being shut down. I don't have to worry about any of that. I can just plug it in and play it. That's obviously not always the case with multiplayer games. So that right there is a huge flaw with multiplayer games. So I don't really know why many games are being more focused on multiplayer nowadays, because single player games are better in every aspect than multiplayer games. You want to pick up a game and be able to immerse yourself and enjoy it for many years to come and indefinitely. Not with multiplayer games where you have to rely on other people, rely on companies keeping their servers up. And even some companies that do keep their servers up, they're complete shit. So even though you can theoretically connect to the servers, connect online and find other players, the connection's just so bad and the servers are so shitty that, say you finally connect with someone, you wait 10 minutes to jump into a game on an old game. You finally connect, you're starting to load in, you get an error and you get knocked back to the main menu. That's not uncommon for a lot of these old PS3 games or Xbox 360 games. So objectively, single player content is much better than multiplayer content on every aspect, in my opinion. And it's pretty easy to see. So having PS5 focus mainly on multiplayer stuff is just going to make the system and all the games obsolete much quicker. And it's pretty easy to see that. So, and the same thing goes with live service games. So we'll kind of talk about that now. Which, pretty much everything I said about multiplayer games, since live service games are multiplayer games, everything I mentioned also fits with live service games. But live service games, there's another little anomaly, part about it that I want to mention, and that's with. So I think the rumors and news going around is basically with PS5 having more multiplayer experiences in general. It's not necessarily a live service. It didn't really specify, a lot of them will be live service. It just said multiplayer in general, so there might not be too many live service games. However, there has been a trend lately where most games, even though if they're not labeled as live service games, a lot of games nowadays are implementing the same type of elements. And again, like I mentioned, everything that I talked about multiplayer games applies here with live service games, but with the other caveat of, okay, so you have this live service game, you have to keep this promise that you made to the customers when they first bought it, when you first released the game, of, we have to keep releasing content, we have to keep it up to date and have people keep on coming back. So one point is, because they have this promise, this duty to fulfill to their customers, most of the time that they put out content to keep players coming back, it's just really super shitty content. And it's nothing revolutionary, it's nothing special or anything, it's just, oh, hey, we added something. It's not good, it's super low quality, we're going to make you pay for it, but hey, we added something because we have to. That's literally the only reason. It's nothing good, it's just because they need to keep their customers, quote-unquote, happy for being a quote-unquote live service game. And then on another hand, another point that I want to add is, with all of these, a lot of the developers for these live service games, when they're developing their game, when they're developing their roadmap for the content they're going to release and stuff like that, a lot of these developers expect that if you're going to buy this game, that they expect you to only play their game only. It's like they don't expect you to play any other game but theirs, which is completely unrealistic. Most people, of course, play many different games, but with live service games, they expect you to keep coming back to theirs. They expect theirs to be their only priority and possibly the only game you play. And of course, that leads to many other problems, such as level gating in games. So I haven't played Destiny 2, but I've heard some problems with level gating. Like, if you want to do a certain raid or strike, you have to be a certain light level, I think that's what it's called, to do that. But it's a super high or unrealistic light level for that part of the game, or you have to be a certain light level, but then you don't play for a bit and they release some new expansions, some new content, and the next thing you know, before you come back, that same strike or raid that you finally got to the light level to do, you might need, the light level might now be super high. It might be way higher than it was when you last played. So now, instead of being able to do it again, you have to unnecessarily grind and play pointless repetitive events just to get your light level up to play a strike or raid that you were once able to do, but because you didn't keep coming back, you played more than one game. You didn't only play this game through all of these new content, all these expansions, you're now severely underleveled, even though the content might be exactly the same. And that's another main problem with live games as a service. Games as a service, yeah. So I think I exhausted all of that. Those were my two main points that I wanted to add to games as a service, on top of everything I mentioned with multiplayer. So yeah, I think that's all I wanted to kind of talk about today. I know I tend to have some unpopular opinions with games, but I think it's important to voice them, because I think a lot of people just automatically think, oh yeah, multiplayer games, they're good, you can play with other people, but that's all they think about, and I just want to voice my opinion. So hopefully some other people will agree with me. Some might help others shed some light on these problems and have a little different way of thinking. Obviously, nothing I say is going to be completely revolutionary and is going to change the fact that PS5 will have a whole bunch of new multiplayer games. It's not like someone from Sony is going to hear this and be like, you know what, he's right, let's ditch that idea and go back and develop mainly single player games. I'm obviously not expecting that to happen. I just want to voice my opinion and give others a different way of thinking, and hopefully some of you agree with me, because I do think it's a major problem, and I don't see any upside to only multiplayer games for the most part. 10 out of 10 times, I would rather play by myself and play a single player experience. Others aren't like that, and I don't really see why, but everyone has their preferences, of course. I'm not going to bash on them for their preferences. So, yeah, I think that's all I have to say for this week. So you can find me on YouTube at Piezilla Gaming. You can find me on Twitter at Piezilla Gaming as well. And you can follow the official Twitter page for the podcast at the Project Platinum Podcast, or the handle is the PP_podcast. All right, thanks guys. Until next week, Piezilla out.